Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth webinar of our series of environmental controls. I'm Priscilla Brendler, the Executive Director of Greater Hudson Heritage Network, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. As you probably have already figured, this is the same group who've participating in the last 3 webinars. So you've all been working very hard on trying to put together your PEM2 monitors and trying to get a really good grip on your collections. But before we begin the webinar itself, I just wanted to welcome you again for today. We have quite a nice little snow coming down here in the lower Hudson Valley, and I'm sure some of you who are in the lower Hudson Valley are experiencing that as well. Otherwise, hopefully the rest of the country and the world, you're having a beautiful day. I would like to welcome you all and to first thank our sponsors for today's webinar, which would be the Institute of Museum and Library Services, for putting today's webinar together. But as always, I'd like to pass this off to Carrie to just troubleshoot a few little details for you before we begin. So Carrie, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. You may have noticed that you have 2 options for listening to the webinar, either through your computer speakers or by calling in. If you are calling in, you may have...
It's gone.
I can hear. If you are calling in, you may have noticed you were supplied with an audio pin. You do not need to use this audio pin. Because of the number of attendees on today's webinar, we have muted you all. If you entered the pin and we have muted you, it's going to cause static on the webinar. Rest assured you do not need the pin to hear the webinar. If you did enter the pin, please hang up and re-call into the webinar without using the pin. If you are listening through your computer speakers and you are having trouble with the sound, here are a couple of quick fixes you might try. First, close any other programs you might be running, but don't close out of the browser because you might log out of the webinar. Second, if you're hearing an echo, you may have mistakenly logged into the webinar twice. Third, if you are using a weak or a wireless network or using a wireless device as a hotspot, you may have trouble with the sound. Worst case, you can change from the VoIP or Voice over Internet Protocol, which is listening through the computer, to listening through the phone. Just click on the telephone option button on your attendee dashboard, dial in with the number provided and the webinar code, but again, not with the audio pin, and you should be able to resume listening. But be aware there's going to be a slight delay. At the bottom of your attendee dashboard is a box for you to ask questions. These can be technical questions for me, like what is the call-in number, or questions about the webinar material for Rachel to answer. Rest assured, we can see all the questions and comments. You won't be able to see them, but trust us, you're not just sending them off into the void. We'll be saving the questions to ask for the end of the program. I think that is about it. I will turn it back over to Priscilla now to tell you more about IMLS.
Thanks, Carrie, so much for doing that. Now, just again, we'd like to thank the Institute for Museum and Library Services for being the sponsor of today's Connect Institute of New York's program. They have generously funded the program, which includes the 4 webinar series, the Circuit Rider program. It includes the website that we have all the content information on, and how-to videos, which are coming your way as of this next year. So I'd like to thank IMLS for that. As you're very familiar by now, this program will be going on for the next year until October 31st of 2014. I want to just give a little bit of a plug about the Circuit Rider program. The Circuit Rider program enables all participants, all viewers, anybody throughout the entire state of New York to request a free consultant to come to your site to talk about any collections care issues you may have. It could be regarding your environmental controls. It could be with your care of your textiles. We may even we've had asked for looking at policies and procedures, looking at the museum's content. It could be anything you want. You can have a consultant come out as frequently as you need, as long as it's not on the same subject, and again, it's free. If you're interested, you can go to the website at the very bottom, the c2cnys.org, and go ahead, shoot us a form requesting it, or if need be, you can also send me an email, which many of you done, and that's just director@greaterhudson.org, requesting for a site visit, and I'll give you a call and we can talk through it a little bit. So I hope you'll take advantage of that one. Next, this is the last of today's webinar, so we're going into webinar series 3, which is starting in January, which is care and storage of historic collections. These are the top collections that were identified as at risk in the statewide survey. The first one will be an overview on January 27th on the care and storage of your objects in your collections, and then specifically we will address the different issues of the material types. On February 25th, we'll talk about books and paper. On March 25th, we have photographs. April 8th is Historic Objects Part 1, and then May 13th is Historic Objects Part 2. Registration is now open. We hope that you will be able to sign up for those. If you have any questions about the content, again, you can give me a call. Before we go into our webinar with Rachel, there's a couple of things that we just wanted to talk to you about. One of them was reminded to me by Carrie, is there has been some issues with people trying to get into the login information for the PEM2. Many people cited that they had not received our email addresses. Well, just like the government and Big Brother, we can actually see everyone who receives our emails. We can see who opened it, who clicked through what links, and we can see everything you do there. And we've noticed that a couple of trends are happening. One is that about 50% of the last emails, people did not open the links, did not even open the email. So make sure if you see anything from Greater Hudson, open it up, please. The second we've run into is those who work for either federal government sites or state government sites are being blocked by their own internal firewall. Of course, we understand they don't want to have any malware come through, so they are very cautious about letting in our content. If that's the case, the contact information we have for you is your official business email. You should consider sending us a personal email so that you can make sure that you receive the information and not being closed out by your organization. And then third, we also noticed that there's one or two organizations who ran into some delays because they were not able to use the external memory stick in their governmental computers when uploading content. If this is a problem for you, please reach out to Rachel and I will see what we can do to help you through that. Is there any other issue there I forgot there, Carrie? Okay. So once again, we're going to bring in Rachel Perkins-Ehrenstein. She is right now in the Middle East, hopefully not snowing like it is here today. And we really appreciate all her time and being able to be with us and walk us through all the details on the PEM2s. So without further delay, I'm going to pass this off to Rachel and give us a moment and we'll let her begin the program.
Hi, folks. Let's see, Carrie, do I have control of the screen yet?
Yep, you have control. It's all yours, Rachel.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
It is my pleasure. I have been reading about all of your weather issues there back in New York, and I have to say it is one of the things that I do not miss here. I had to actually break out a fleece today, or a light jacket. So I am enjoying this aspect of being here in the Middle East. Okay, let me try and minimize some of this dashboard stuff on my screen. Okay, we have a lot to cover. So welcome to the final webinar in Greater Hudson Heritage Network Series 2 webinars on environmental monitoring and control. So I'm just going to jump in and let's see if my computer will agree with me. There we go. Okay. So as Priscilla mentioned, this is the final webinar in our series. And today we're going to focus on looking at the data and using the eClimate Notebook metrics. I don't want you to think that I'm pulling a bait and switch on you because the title for this was Sustainable Practices for Managing the Environment. But today I'm going to focus less on managing your environment because I think from the emails and from what we're seeing from participants, that's not quite where you guys are at. So I want to focus today on looking at your data and how to begin to mine your data. We're going to examine some of the temperature and RH data that's already in the site and see what we can learn from looking at the graphs and using the preservation metrics. We'll begin a discussion about what to look for as you review your data, and how to use it to make decisions appropriate for your collections and for your budget. Okay, but before we get to that, let me review a few things from the last session for those who may still be confused about how to get started logging in and uploading your data. About a third of you have already successfully uploaded your data. There's a few quirky things that I've noticed in working on the site for the last couple of days, and I've emailed a number of you individually, and if you get an email from me, please also open it, because I may have some questions for you about your data set or something else that's going on the site. Some of you, though, have encountered some difficulties starting up, and so let me just quickly review some of this. So the most important thing is to get your logger logging the data. You know, if it takes us a while to get your data into the into the eClimate Notebook software, that's okay. But as long as you're logging away, where you're not sort of losing time in acquiring data to begin with. So again, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to decide where you want to put your logger. We've in the last couple of sessions, we've reviewed sort of some of the guidelines for where to, how to choose where you're going to monitor and where to place the logger itself. Waking up the logger from its sleep mode, where which it travels in, and getting started logging is really quite simple. You need to have a USB flash drive. You want one that does not have a lot of old files on it, although we have heard from a couple of people who have bought new ones that have encryption software, some newer files on them. So there's a whole other set of issues that we're now aware of that can happen with some of the newer, snazzier USB files. And if that happens, you can check out this link below on the support flash drive, or you can simply email me and I'll walk you through it. But in any case, what you really need to do is insert your flash drive in. You're going to wait for the little moon symbol to disappear and the hourglass icon to flash for about 10 seconds. And once you see the monitor alternatingly displaying the temperature and relative humidity, you're all set and good to go. After your logger has been logging for a day or so, or a week, we don't want to spend too much time waiting and without knowing that there's some sort of issue. So get your logger logging wherever it is, and then if you can, within a week or as soon as possible, try retrieving the data from the PEM. Again, about a third of you who are participating in this program have already done this. You're up and running. But to retrieve the data, you're going to put the same flash drive back into the slot there on the right, and you'll see the hourglass icon flashing on and off. When the hourglass icon disappears, you're going to remove your flash drive, and your data file should be on there, and you're ready to transfer your data now to the eClimate Notebook website. Okay. For those of you who haven't logged in yet, please make sure that you open the emails from the Greater Hudson Heritage Network, because they contain your eClimate Notebook account information to log on to GHHN's professional level eClimate Notebook account. Everybody has the same password, but your username is unique. Don't forget that the passwords are case sensitive. If you're having trouble logging in, please feel free to contact me directly, because that will probably be the easiest way to walk you through it. Again, you log in here on the top right. Okay. Once you're logged in, you are, and I'm going to jump out of this and go into our account. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Hopefully I'm not making you dizzy as I move this around. Okay. Let me show you a little bit of what's going, once you log in, you are going to go to the Data Manager tab, which is on the sort of top navigation menu, and you're going to go to Upload Data. If you've gotten this far, the instructions in the PDF that GHHN sent you from last month's presentation should help you walk through the rest. You're going to click on Upload. You're going to browse to your file, and then select that file and rename it to whatever name you're looking for. I'm sorry, whatever name is that will identify you. And then we talked last time about managing the hierarchy. So let me just quickly see if I can do this real time for you. We're going to upload. Let me find the data set that I pulled out. Okay, we're going to use this short one. I'm going to. Okay, so here I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call this test data, and I'm going to click OK. And you'll see when it's ready, upload of test data was successful. You can upload another data set if you have more than one PEM. And even if you have more than one PEM, you're welcome to upload it to the GHHN site. Or you can continue to graph, which is what I'm going to do now. Okay. So what you will see when you log into the site may differ depending on who has been in last or who, whether you were looking at data last. And this is one thing that I'm not quite sure, so it will be interesting to get feedback. But what you're seeing here is this is the name of our account, the Greater Hudson Heritage Network account. And this menu that we have here on the left-hand side is very much like the sort of Explorer menu, the File Explorer menu in Windows. So I can expand it by either clicking on Expand All or by clicking on this little plus sign here. And when I do that, you can see that it opens the menu of all the other things that are underneath it. So when I expand it now, you're going to see a list of all of the various counties in New York, or at least the ones that we thought that there would be participants in the program. So ultimately, you're going to, once we've assigned a location to your data set, you're going to be looking for your data under your county. What's mostly been happening is that some people have not used the Manage Their Hierarchy, which is explained in the last presentation notes, and so their data sets are winding up in this unassigned locations category here, which is where we put our test data. So if you don't see your data correctly filed under the appropriate county, you can contact me, or you can check back on the notes from last month, and what you need to do is you need to go to the Manage Hierarchy and assign a location. Let me show you quickly how to do that now. we're going to click again on our data manager. And we're not going to go to upload data. We are going to go to manage hierarchy here. Okay. So what I've been finding happening has been a lot of people have been trying to put their information in here in this manage hierarchy level naming section. And that is not where it goes. It's, I realize now that it's a quite reasonable thing for people to have done, but that's not it. So what this is here for is to explain to you what the levels are. So all of our data in the account is going to be filed by county, and then you're going to assign a site or building name, and then the floor, and then the room. And ultimately, your data is, the actual logger is going to be named the name that you gave it when you uploaded your data set. So this is sort of assigning a larger sort of environment to it so that you can find it. And as you can see, down here is a list of all the location data sets. And if you click on the top of a category here, you'll be able to sort it alphabetically or numerically. So in this case, we want to add the hierarchy for that test data that I just put in. So I scroll down and I go to test data, and I can see that I haven't assigned the hierarchy yet because my file is open, as opposed to all of these where the file is closed. So I'm not going to add the information here. I'm going to scroll down till I find my data, and I'm going to click on Assign Location Data Set. Hopefully you can see the little green button that has popped up. Okay. Now this window has popped up here, so this is going to ask me to select my county first, which is our top level. I'm going to say Westchester for kicks. With site and building name. Now you'll see that external, because I already have external data for Westchester in the system, but that's not what I want. I want to assign my site or building name. So I'm going to go to the plus here and add a new value. And I'm going to say that this is one rectory, which is actually my address in Westchester. I'm going to say that it was on the second floor. Don't worry if you write it numerically or write it out. And I'm going to say library. Now I'm going to hit assign. So now if I scroll back down to the table, my test data now has a location. I can always go back in and edit this, but if I'm happy with it, I can go back to graphs, and you'll see it's no longer unassigned locations. We should find our data under Westchester, and there it is. Now if I keep expanding these boxes, I'm going to get to my test data. And once I click on that, you'll see the box, the full box indicates that this is a data set that we're looking at, the check boxes. And here is the data set. Okay, so this is just a quick review of how to upload your data and how to work a little bit in finding where your data has gone and assigning the hierarchy so that you can find it in the right place. Ultimately, when everybody has entered their data, if we have counties that are not represented, we'll delete those so it's not quite as bulky. So, but in terms of finding your data, if you log into the site and you see data that's not what you're looking for, you can click on the uncheck all, and that's going to clear the graphs so that you're not looking at any other data that you don't want to be seeing. And you can collapse all to sort of get back to this more simplified version so that you're only opening the county that you want to take a look at. Okay. So let me backtrack a little bit, since this is really just a review of focusing on the Climate Notebook, getting your stuff into the Climate Notebook. And again, I'm here to help. Let me get us back up. Hopefully back up and running. There we go. Okay. So I recognize that our participants come from a variety of different types of institutions, and that as we've sort of learned not only from hearing from you, but also from the various polls, you all have various levels of technological comfort and expertise. Some of you are still trying to figure out what a flash drive is, and some of you have been using the PEM2s for a while. As I said earlier, today I want to focus on the preservation metrics in the Climate Notebook program. This software program is very rich and has a lot of useful information that you can mine. And this webinar is going to introduce you to the features, but it's not enough time to make you an expert in its use. I've been working with the Image Permanence product since they were first launched in 2001, and I'm still always learning. And so while this webinar is designed to give you tools to understand your data, you also have to recognize that preservation specialists spend a lot of time acquiring the knowledge and expertise to really understand this kind of data. You know, there's whole lectures, and you can spend a semester on the psychometric charts and things like that. So translating the data into an engineering solution is even another whole specialty. So keep in mind that nobody expects you to be an expert in all of this after like four webinar course. And before I don't want to wait to the end of the program to sort of give you an overview and of the resources that are here to help. The reason why we chose the PEM2 for this program is because it's a good quality logger, and it's ultimately the logger itself is easy to use. But the main advantage is that by using GHHN's professional account on the eClimate Notebook site, we can support you by answering questions both about the technological issues that crop up as well as about your data over time. And remember that as part of this grant, as Priscilla mentioned, that there's a number of preservation specialists who are called circuit riders, and that you can request a visit from a circuit rider to come and help you address a particular preservation concern. The circuit riders will have access to the data, and they'll be able to discuss the particulars of your situation with you. So don't worry if you're feeling overwhelmed. For those of you who are just challenged by logging in and uploading, we'll get you set up. I've walked several people through on the phone. I have an excellent calling plan. I will call you if I need to. And it isn't hard once you're set up. It gets much easier because the program recognizes your logger serial number, and things tend to go much faster after the first time. So if today's program seems like a bit of a whirlwind tour through the software, just try and follow along. And once you're feeling more comfortable with the logger and accessing the site, I hope you'll come back to review the PDF of these presentations and explore the site more on your own. Don't forget that there's a lot of useful information in the support section of eClimate Notebook, which is also good for troubleshooting. In addition, IPI has a lot of ways that you can continue learning about the site and this topic. So by clicking on the Fundamentals section and this Information Management section, you can find out a lot more about the advanced features that we're going to be discussing today. There's also some groovy videos, and you can learn a lot by watching these videos that IPI has created. Some of them you can access directly from the resources section of the eClimate Notebook site, and others are available on a related site where they focus on sustainability issues. And some of these are even accessible if you type in IPI or PM2 or eClimate Notebook on YouTube. I'm not saying that you have to watch any of these. Most of you already have your hands full running a museum. Many of you are doing the work of several people. But if you are interested, I wanted to let you know how much information you have easily available to you. Additionally, along with your PM2, GHHN sent you each a copy of IPI's Sustainable Preservation Practices for Managing Storage Environments workbook. You can download the workbook as well as other useful information on IPI's Sustainability Workshop Series webpage, and the link is given here. So you'll have that easily available to you when you get the notes from this presentation. But you can find all of that stuff online. The workbook has full explanations of a lot of the stuff that I'll be going over today. So whether you're a visual learner, a reader, there's lots of ways for you to troubleshoot, learn more, refresh your memory from some of the things we're going to look at today. Okay, so let's return to looking at your data and viewing and manipulating your graph. I'm going to jump back and forth a little bit between the PowerPoint and the actual eClimate Notebook site, because I think sometimes that's going to, a sort of live tour is going to give us the best experience in looking at what we need to. But first, what I want to review is viewing your data. So the first way that you can view your data is the graphs view, and that's sort of the default when you go into the site. This shows your data in graphical form for all the preservation metrics. And so let's quickly review some of the ways that you can manipulate your graph. Okay. First, we talked a little bit already about finding your data in the hierarchy. So let's say I'm the Wildlife Conservation Society. I'm going to click on Bronx, and then I'm going to keep on clicking till I find my data. And here it comes. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is the temperature data here. If we keep clicking through this, as we're going to work our way through all of these in our presentation, but we're looking first at temperature. If we click here, we're looking at our relative humidity data. And some people like to look at their temperature and RH data at the same time. And there are some good reasons why we might want to do this. So as you'll see here, the temperature is the bold red here, and the key, the access for that is here over on the left, whereas the pink is indicated by is the RH indicated by the pink, and it corresponds to the this axis over here on the right. And of course, we have our date down below. So when you don't see this in both when you have both the temperature and RH together, because it makes it too busy, and you're looking at two different scales, as you see here. But let's go back to the temperature, and what you'll see here is that we have these two bars. What I have done for our account is to give us a general temperature range of 60 degrees to 75 degrees. And that's not to say that you, many of you will over time exceed or come under this temperature range, and that's okay. I talked in previous webinars about the fact that we're trying not to be dogmatic about this 70 degrees, 50% RH standard, that it's not a standard, that it was intended as general guidelines, and that it's that we have to work with what kind of collection you are, what kind of building you're in, and whether that's an appropriate guideline for you in the first place. But for sort of general reference, I put in 60 to 75. And so this is sort of the box where we'd like to see people. It's a little bit too cold for human comfort. Anything warmer than 75 is, sort of certainly warmer than necessary for your collections. You can also see that our temperature scale is beginning at 30 degrees here, because for the most part, most of us don't have indoor temperatures that approach freezing. But if you like to look at your data on a 0 to 100 scale, you can do that by just clicking here in the graphing tools, and you can see that it changed this axis over here. Okay, so let's take a look again at the RH. If you can keep your RH at a very tight band, that's great. But in the earlier webinars, I also discussed that the research has shown that most materials can withstand a slightly broader range. There are some materials, especially composite objects, especially certain kinds of artifacts and collections that that have tighter needs in terms of their RH. But to give us sort of a broad window, we're looking to stay within 30% to 60%. Above 60 is when we start getting into the risks of mold, and below 30 is when we start to see real desiccation of collections and things drying out. So this is where we sort of want to stay within this box. And again, here on RH, we always go from 0 to 100. Okay, so we've talked about our hierarchy. We've talked about what you can, how you can sort of look at your graph here. And again, if we have temperature and RH, you're looking at these two different scales here, but we can change it so that they're both on the same scale. Then the other thing is this date range, that right now we're looking at all the data, and most of you only have a few weeks, if that, of data in the system at the moment, and that's okay. But ultimately, you can either choose by the calendar button, you can choose here, or you can, let's see, go and enlarge just by clicking and pulling on your graph. And that's going to change up here the date range that you're looking at. Well, when you enlarge a section of the graph, you have this quick and easy button here that will bring you back to 100%. What you also get is a little viewing window down below, which shows you how much of your full data set you've enlarged here. And if you keep enlarging, you'll be able to see the individual data points that your PEM2 has measured. So every dot here represents a half an hour in which the PEM2 has taken a measurement. So I'm going to click back and to get us back to the full data for. Okay, so we have we've sort of done a quick review on how you can change your date. How you can change your axes, and you can always explore these. You can export your data. You can print the graphs. You can make them full screen. You can email them, and you can play around with colors if IPI's color themes have not excited you. Let me. I'm going to uncheck the Wildlife Conservation's data, and let's take a look at somebody else's data for a minute, just to give you another reason why you might want to look at the date range. We're going to come back to this a little bit, but for most of the counties, with a few exceptions, the Bronx is actually one of them, there is some external data that is going to allow us to take a look at how your internal data, meaning the data inside your institution, matches up against the external data from the outside, your outside weather conditions. And so most of the counties have either an airport or some other weather station, and that information has been uploaded, and I'll continue to ensure that it continues to be uploaded for you you'll be able to use that over time. Now, when we input the data from the external weather stations, IPI has set it up so that it imports the last 3 years. That's a lot more than we need because you guys are only starting now. So you'll see that this is our outdoor data, and pretty much every county is going to have this similar trend. And if you look at it, it's sort of obvious. Again, we're looking at temperature here. Our temperatures sort of peak in July and August, and then they go down. They're lowest in January, February. And we're sort of bottoming out on our graph here because, again, we're using that 30 to 100 scale. So if I change it, then we get everything. You can see that in terms of temperature, that that if we just have our stuff outside, most of our year is not where we would like it to be. And if we look at RH2, most of our year up in Albany is much more humid than we would like to keep our collections. But what we're sort of interested in is what's going on here. So let's enlarge. And again, Albany County Hall of Records only has a very teeny little bit of data in here. So we're not going to learn very much from looking at it at the moment. But I just wanted to sort of show you that this is one of the things that you might want to do in terms of modifying your graph and enlarging or modifying your data. Okay, by unchecking, I'm going to bring us back to a clear screen. The one thing I want to emphasize is that you cannot break the graphs. There's nothing that you can do in this section of the site to irrevocably damage your data or anybody else's data. So feel free to surf around, click on buttons, play with the date range, play with the graphing tools. It's okay. Okay, let's go to the analysis quickly. And let's take a look at some statistics. Okay, so if we've selected a data set that we want to take a look at, we click on the analysis button, and then you'll see that we have a couple of options here. We have risks and metrics, which I'll get to next. But for really basic stuff, we just want to pull up our statistics. This is pretty straightforward. We have temperature, relative humidity, dew point, and this T limits and RH limits are what I've set up for you here. Feel free to change this if you'd like to. If you feel that these limits are looser, or than you might want for your collections. And I'm going to show you why these are relevant sort of down the road. Because ultimately, you'll see that if we'd like to keep our temperature within 60 to 75, so far, the Chautauqua, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Sports Hall of Fame has their temperature within the appropriate band 100% of the time. Their RH, though, is low almost 82% of the time, and only about 18% of the time is in that band that we'd like to see it. So we'll take a look at that in a minute. But in terms of the temperature, you can get your mean and your medium, your minimum and maximum. And I'm not going to go into the standard deviation, but if you're into that, that's available for you too, all in your statistics tab. So this, if you're filling out a facilities report and they ask you what are your temperature statistics, this is a fast place that you can go to pull that information. Okay. Let's take a look. Next, I have, I think this slide, I think we pretty much covered some of this, but again, quickly review. The band is our limits that we've set. This is temperature here on the left, and relative humidity here on the right. What we're doing actually here is we're comparing two external temperatures and two external RH represented by the red and blue with the town of Schuyler Falls data inside. So you'll see that the temperature over here is for most of the year much colder than we would want to keep our collections, or at least collections where we also have humans, and the humidity is generally much higher than what we're seeing indoors. Okay. Next, let's go and we're going to move into the preservation metrics, and those are found in the also in the analysis tab in this risks and metrics. So I'm going to give you some information about what these numbers are. I want you to understand a little bit about how these were developed and what the numbers mean, but ultimately, if you don't want to, you don't need to actually understand, fully understand or remember this, as long as if you're comfortable sticking with this risk summary. So in the previous presentations in this webinar series, we've discussed the different kinds of deterioration or different kinds of decay factors that our collections are susceptible to. We talked about natural aging, or sometimes we were calling it chemical aging. So that's impacted by heat. We talked about mold and the risk of biological deterioration and pests. We talked about metal corrosion, which is sort of related to natural aging and chemical aging, like a chemical reaction. And we talked about mechanical damage, the kinds of physical damage that you see particularly egregiously in composite objects, things that are made up of multiple kinds of materials. So what you're looking at here are three different locations within a historic house. And what you can see is that the solarium is a problematic location in almost every way. It's lucky for them that they actually don't have a whole lot of collections or even historic furnishings in the solarium because everything there is at higher risk. In these other locations, in the cherry bedroom and the attic, in fact, many of the metrics are similar, and you can see that reflected also in the summary rating. So we're fine for mold. We are getting temperatures that are really too high, which is why we have this red. Sort of green is good, red is bad, and gray is sort of neutral, that you're within an appropriate band, or it's just not so terrible there. So again, I'm going to start to go through some of these preservation metrics so that those of you who are more advanced can understand how these came about. But if that's a little bit more than you're comfortable with, stick with the green good, red bad. And what we're going to try and do is reduce you from red to gray. Or if you're in gray, see if you can get from gray to green. Okay. So ultimately, this risks and metrics section takes your data, the data that you've uploaded into the program, and it runs it through these various algorithms that IPI has set up. and this is what they call their preservation metrics. So let's take a little look at what these are and why we use them. The preservation metrics are ultimately tools for looking at and understanding your data. They are particular to your data, and you'll see these numbers and the sort of green, red, and gray will change over time as you upload your data. So if you only have a week's worth of data right now, and it's been sort of cool and dry in the winter, you're going to log in and you're going to see, oh, everything's green, we're looking good. But don't get overconfident, because I know many of you are in historic homes and don't have, full HVAC systems with humidification and dehumidification. So I don't want you to get overconfident and depressed if then you log in come the spring when things get more variable and you start to see that your ratings have changed. Ultimately, the way I hope that you will use these, or that you will allow us to help you in analyzing them, is to accurately and objectively determine how each storage area is performing. Again, many of you only have one PM2, and so you're only logging in one area, and you may not have data on your other areas, but that's something that we can take a look at over time. And it may be that if you realize that one area is really not as good as you thought, you're going to look at making changes or improvements there, or maybe figuring out other ways to protect your collection within that space. Ultimately, the metrics can flag potential problems, and as you do make improvements over time, document the impact of those changes. So for the most part, we're going to be taking a look, the circuit riders, and I can help you take a look at your data. You should be, ideally, I discussed last month, uploading your data on a monthly basis just to make sure that the logger is working properly and that you spend a little bit of time taking a look. But that it's really going to be at the end of this year that we can look back at the year's worth of data to really sort of assess what's going on. And then ultimately, we hope that some of you will consider purchasing, if not a PM2, some other form of data logger so that you can document whether you were able to make changes and improve the conditions in your spaces. Ultimately, many institutions that have been using not just the PM2, but any form of data logger to document their conditions. It can explain to funding agencies or donors how bad things are, as well as sort of documenting your need for whether it's better cabinetry or money to repair your air conditioning units, or those kinds of changes. Okay, so so I showed you in the previous slide that the preservation metrics establish this risk rating system based on good, okay, or risk, to broadly identify the risks posed by your environmental conditions where you're monitoring. And again, we looked in the slide where it's doing that for each of these different kinds of decay. And here, just as a reminder, is another three locations from that same historic site. The boiler, just like the solarium in the previous slide, is a problematic space. The dining room is a little bit drier and is the sort of same general trend as that upstairs bedroom. Okay. Here I want to jump to this dew point calculator again that I think I've mentioned in the past. So what you're seeing here, and I'll try and sort of do this live for you, but the dew point calculator is sort of the basis for a lot of these algorithms that the Image Permanence Institute has worked up. And the idea behind the dew point calculator is that you can explore various combinations of temperature, RH, and ultimately dew point, and compare the preservation quality of each environment. The dew point temperature determines what combinations of temperature and RH will be possible in the storage environment. At a constant dew point, when the temperature goes up, the RH goes down. And when the RH goes down, the temperature goes up. Controlling the dew point is the key for managing the risk of your material decay. Every environment has one combination of temperature, relative humidity, and dew point. So changing any of these variables, you're going to have a different environment. So you can use this dew point calculator to determine what the dew point is in your space by entering your temperature and your RH, and it's going to solve for dew point. Or you can see what combinations of temperature and RH are possible when you change the dew point. So how, again, we've discussed this earlier, but it was a long time ago. So let's talk again briefly about how temperature, relative humidity, and dew point are related. At a constant temperature, the RH and dew point will increase or decrease together. At a constant relative humidity, the temperature and the dew point are going to increase or decrease together. At a constant dew point, the temperature increases and the RH decreases, or vice versa. So let's see if I can get us to this live. Okay. So let's say we were saying that we wanted to have a 70-degree temperature, and our RH is, let's say, 49. Our dew point is, 50, and our dew point is also 50. When I've moved these sliders around, you can look over here, and this is the preservation evaluation for this set of statistics. Our natural aging is a risk here because 70 degrees is really based on our human comfort level. It's a little bit warmer than we would ideally want for our collections. So if I bring this down to 66, you can see that our red changed to gray, so that we're in a slightly better preservation environment for our collections. Things won't chemically age quite as fast. And our PI, which I'll talk about shortly, has gone up. So let me do this again for you. At 70, our PI was 39, which put us in a risk category. And at 66, just by bringing it down a few degrees, our preservation index has gone up and gives us an OK rating. So let's try and manipulate something else. Let's go up to 63 here. At 66. So our natural aging now is a problem because our RH is a little bit high. We're still under where we're still under a risk for mold, and we're okay in our mechanical damage, but for corrosion, for metal corrosion, this is a problem. If we bring ourselves down to 56, and keep on going even down to 34, we've changed our environment substantially. So as the idea here is that you can play around with this. It's just sort of a fun tool to try and see, well, this preservation, sort of idea of the 70 degrees and 50 is okay. But for, making things a little bit colder or a little bit drier, is also good. If if our environment is hot and dry, there are some things that are good about that, some things that are bad about that. So ultimately, the idea is by playing around with this dew point calculator, you can start to get a sense of how temperature, relative humidity, and dew point determine your preservation quality. As you manipulate these sliders, it's going to tell you how you're doing with your types of decay and the metrics. If you want to, you can save a particular set of conditions here so that you can start to compare them and see what's going on. So this is a way of sort of remembering what things you've been playing around with. Okay. Remember for the dew point, if your building does not have humidification or dehumidification, your indoor dew point is going to be seeing the same as your outdoor dew point. And when we take a look at some of the data that's in the account, we'll take a look at that as well. So this is a separate website. It's you'll get the link in the presentation, but you can also just Google dew point calculator, and that's going to bring you to the site. And I believe that there is a link within the Climate Notebook program as well. Okay, so let's go back and look at some of the other preservation matrices. So here in this last slide before we leave it, you're seeing just two different scenarios here, 68 and 45, temperature and relative humidity, with and 76 and 45. And you can see how it changes your overall preservation summaries over here on the right. Okay. So PI. Now we're back to what you'd be seeing if you're in the Climate Notebook account. We've discussed how you look at your temperature, how you can look at your RH, you can look at them both together. I'm jumping over temporarily now to what's called the PI, or Preservation Index. Just like I showed you with the dew point calculator, every combination of temperature and RH has its own, basically has its own preservation index. Image Permanence Institute has created this to sort of give you a way of evaluating what is a better environment or not. So for every data point, every half an hour when your PEM2 takes a measurement, it will calculate a preservation index. Generally, the colder and drier or sort of more moderate your RH is, the higher your rating will be. You would like your rating to be as high as possible. Here we have this sudden spike. I chose this data set to show you. This is a very sudden spike when the heat went out in the winter of this historic home, and because it was very cool, it was almost sort of like cold cryogenic storage for the collection. That's not actually a condition that we really want, but for that individual point in time, the PI is considered quite high because it was very cold. But for the most part, you can see in the summer the environment is sort of less good. Their numbers are lower, and in the winter, when it's a little bit cooler in the house, their numbers go up. Ultimately, you'd like this number, a sort of good rating, I believe, is it's anywhere over 45. A 45 to 75 gives sort of an okay environment, and a PI of over 100 is excellent. But if you can stay above 45 here, you're going to be in that gray band. Here we're looking at three different spaces, and you can see that this red one has a few more issues and has lower numbers overall than, let's say, even the attic. Okay, so the PI is an individual point in time for every data point measured by your PEM. But if you want to get a sense of your improvement over time, what you want to take a look at is your time-weighted preservation index. So this is a slide just looking at one space, this Cherry bedroom. And what you'll see here is sort of grayed out is the data from the individual points in time. And this time-weighted preservation index recognizes that even though you had some good periods here where you were up, around 75 or even up to 400, that ultimately you have a lot of periods where your environment is not so great. The analogy that that I think is really effective in understanding that why our time-weighted preservation index is only 27, which is red, a red, sort of risk rating, is that that the bad environment takes more out of our collections than a good environment does. So if we think about this in the same way, if you leave a quart of milk out on your counter, it's going to go bad faster on your counter than it would in your refrigerator. If you leave it out on your counter for a couple of days and then put it in your refrigerator, you might get a little bit longer out of it, but it doesn't undo that time that it's spent out on your counter. So leaving it out on the counter is like having a low PI. Keeping it in the refrigerator is like having high PI. And so putting it, after being in the counter for a couple of days, in the refrigerator will pull up your time-weighted preservation index a little bit, but again, it's going to spoil faster than if it had been in the refrigerator the whole time. So again, the idea of this, the time-weighted preservation index, is to see sort of how you're doing either seasonally or as you make improvements to your environment over the long haul. And the idea is that if this institution can get their environment from 27 up to 30, they've done something good. If they can get up from 30 up to 40, they've made another jump in their overall preservation environment. So that's how you should be using these preservation index and time-weighted preservation index. The PI is related to that sort of dew point calculator sliders where you can see what's going on for any particular point in time, and the time-weighted is looking at it over time. Okay, so let's talk about the natural aging type of decay. So here's how you see this metric is used. If you have something over 75, you're going to be in the green is good. If you're reaching 45 to 75, you're in an okay. And if you're under 45, you're at risk. So this information is within the within the eClimate Notebook site. So if you want to read more about how the algorithm works, you can check this out. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading through this with you. You'll have the presentation. You can read it on your own, or you can check it within the site. But again, this natural aging, we've discussed this, these different kinds of aging that talks about the various measures, the combinations of temperature and RH that will that factor into this metric, and the role in the environment, why this metric is used for natural aging, and what are the vulnerable materials. So if you've got a collection that's heavily based on organics, like paper or ethnographic materials, this is going to be an important metric for you to pay attention to. Okay. The next kind of decay was mechanical damage. For mechanical damage, the metric that Image Permanence Institute has set up is what's called the equilibrium moisture content. So That measures the amount of moisture in the environment and the degree of fluctuation between periods of dampness and dryness, all of which promote the mechanical or physical damage, so the kinds of cracking that you see in a wood or an ivory object, or in the spine of a book. And what happens here is mostly the kinds of fluctuations are going to be important. So this mechanical damage is being measured against the rates of fluctuation in the data that it's seeing in your data set. And so if you don't want to focus again on the numbers here, you've got your good, okay, and risk metric, or you can sort of get technical with your number. That if you're under an equilibrium moisture content of 0.5, that means that the environment is pulling moisture out of your object. And if you're over a 5% moisture content, it means that your object is going to be absorbing moisture. So this is a graph of that same location that we've been looking at, that the EMC here. And so you'll see the EMC here is 4, is a 4 minimum and a 11.5 maximum. So if we go up, that you'll see that that's okay here in terms of that's going to put us within an acceptable rate in this. Sorry, we did that wrong. That's putting us. Sorry, I was looking at that thinking that's not right. That we're under 4 in some parts, and at 11.5 we actually have quite high fluctuations. And so this is not a trend that we're going to be really happy with for this space. Okay, so next we have dimensional change. Here also, where is the slide for dimensional change? This is our graph. Bear with me, we're going to come back to dimensional change. Let's jump to mold risk, and we'll figure out one of my slides has clearly gotten out of order. So mold risk, we basically have good or risk. There's no okay rating for mold growth. There's the sort of potential for mold, and then there's probably having mold. So the idea is that if you're at risk, that there's time for you to react, because having mold germinate takes a little bit of time. So if your environment is sort of increasingly bringing you towards mold, then this is sort of the time to ask. Sorry, time to act. Data for the mold risk is analyzed to determine if the environmental conditions are there to promote biological decay. If you exceed the 1.0 level that indicates that mold spores have germinated, it does not mean that you are definitely going to see mold in your collections. If your collections are clean and you don't have mold spores that are there to germinate, it's possible that even if you have those conditions, you won't see mold. But the fact is that a lot of our storage spaces are not as clean as ideally they should be, or that we'd like them to be. And having collections be dirty is one of the things that can attract and make them more vulnerable to mold spores. So Sorry, let's take a look here of the same historic home that we've been using at the cellar here. You can see that this cherry bedroom that we've been looking at before is so hot and so dry that we never approach this 1.0 where you could expect that mold, if it's present, would germinate. But in their cellar, they, in fact, this first summer had a huge problem with mold because they had extended periods where they were over this germination point. By the next summer, they had put in dehumidifiers, and while I think I've been working with them because they need to do a little bit of better job of where the dehumidifier is placed, for the most part, you can see the difference between the summer and fall of 2012 and the summer and fall of 2013 was a huge difference in their risk of mold. Let's go back and talk about metal corrosion. Metal corrosion also uses the equilibrium moisture content as its metric to give you these ratings, but it calculates the numbers differently than it does for the other category of mechanical damage. In this case, we would like to have a drier environment. Research, more sort of recent research is showing that iron, and especially archaeological iron, should be held at much lower RHs than we even had previously thought. But most metals would benefit from a lower moisture content in the air. And so if you don't want to get into the numbers again, just paying attention to the interpretation here is going to help you understand what your risk is for corrosion of your metal collections. Just like it points out here, the role of environment, that again, atmospheric pollutants, dust and other things will help attract moisture to your collections, so keeping them clean in addition to keeping them in a low RH environment is something that you can do. Reducing salts and oils, all of those will contribute to improving the conditions for metal collections and storage. Okay. Let's go back to dew point that we keep sort of touching on. Here, you can see that this is the same historic houses in the cellar, and as being compared to, in the teal, the exterior conditions for Plymouth, Massachusetts. Oh, and what you can see in this slide is that the dew point and the cellar conditions are pretty comparable. It's buffered to a certain extent, but it's following this same general trend. But it's a little bit higher. The cellar conditions are higher here in 2012, and then by using the dehumidifier in 2013, you can see it pulls it down underneath the top part of the exterior dew point. So let's talk about a few things that are sort of common in the data and just things that you can look out for. This graph here shows us what we'd expect to see over time with general seasonal fluctuations. So this graph is going from 2005 up to 2008. This is, so we have a 3-year period here for a historic structure in New York City. We can see that the trend, the band that was set up for temperature was between 60 and 70 degrees, and only sort of in the winter time are they actually sort of late fall to early spring, are they sort of within that. Most of the time, sort of in the summer, they're significantly higher because they do not have, as a historic home, they don't have any cooling, because this is they're interpreting this as for sort of in the early to mid 20th century. But we've discussed in a couple of the earlier programs that ultimately collections equilibrate to temperature quite quickly, but it takes within a matter of hours. But it takes them much longer to equilibrate to swings in RH. And so ultimately, if we can, this is just a graph of the temperature here, but ultimately if we can sort of modify this, buffer this trend and make it not quite so highly variable, and sort of reduce these swings a little bit, we're going to have made a positive impact in our preservation environment, because our collections don't respond to the RH swings quite as fast as they do to the temperature swings. The temperature here in this environment was much more dangerous to humans who would be on a long tour, sometimes in these very hot conditions. And so one of the analyses that this historic site used was to figure out how they could deal with some of the human comfort issues. One thing I'd like to point out to here in looking at your data is if you ever see this sort of straight line, and I think we'll look at it in some of our data, this is a blip here where they don't have data in here. So this kind of straight line is a sign that something's going on, that you're missing some data points. We'll see if we can find another example of that later on. This is an example of a site that has possibly some of the tightest controls that I've ever seen. It was in a purpose-built storage building in Montreal, Canada, which houses collections for a number of different museums. The whole building was built with a very high-performing HVAC system, and the actual physical structure of the building was designed to help that HVAC system perform well. And as you can see, they have this over this period of February to November, so almost a full year, very little modification in their temperature. And the lighter teal here is the RH, and you can see that they were holding it at almost 50 degrees, 50% RH this whole time. Most of you, if you are in a historic structure, you will never see a graph like this. And I don't expect you to, and you shouldn't expect to. This is great, and this is a great facility for all of the collections that are being stored there. But this, again, was a purpose-designed facility with an expensive heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system there, and that's the only way you get a graph that looks like this as opposed to looking like this. This is a site with a number of different storage, so we're comparing 4 different spaces here. And what you can start to see here is all of these have a HVAC system, but some of them are being fed by different air handlers. They're not all on the same system. If they were, there are some of these trends would be probably a little bit more similar. So if you're in a larger institution and you do have an HVAC system, one of the things that the workbook talks about, and a number of the videos, if you have the time to spend to watch those, is getting together with your facilities people in your sort of preservation environmental monitoring team that we talked about setting up, and really getting a good understanding of what your HVAC system, how it's constructed and designed, and what it's capable of doing. Because you may not need to monitor in every single room if they're all being fed by one air handler. if you've got different actual systems feeding into different spaces, you may want to be monitoring one representative space for each of those systems so that you understand what's going on. So you can see that that these trends are sort of similar, but that there's something going on in this oversized storage, which through the summer and fall is consistently lower than some of the other spaces here. So I just wanted to show you this graph to give you a sense of, their system is performing adequately. They're within their band, but even within one institution with different air handlers, you have quite a degree of variability in the system. I wanted to show you this graph because this graph was created by importing data from a different kind of logger, not a PM2. When this institution took a look at their data, they were like, oh, this isn't so bad. We'd only dropped down under 20% RH for a short period of time. But what I pointed out was that knowing what this other logger was, the other logger actually stopped measuring. It bottomed out at 15%. That data logger that they were using was not actually capable of registering RH levels under 15%. So in fact, their data was worse than what they thought they were looking at. So again, if you ever see like completely flat lines or completely straight lines like in that earlier graph, let me know because there's something funky going on. Okay. Before we hit this section, let's take a look at, with some of our time, at the data that we have in the Climate Notebook site. Okay, I'm going to expand all. And let's take a quick look at some of the things that you guys have already put in there. We're going to go back to our graphs. Okay, so the Albany County Hall of Records does not have a whole lot of data in there. They only have 4 days. But over those 4 days, they have a nice stable temperature, which is resulting also in a nice stable RH. So their temperature, if we wanted to go to analysis, we can do get a quick sense of their statistics. Here's their risk and metrics. We're going to click here on statistics. That we can see that their median or mean temperature is around 67. Their mean RH is in the mid-40s. They are within these bands that we've sort of set up as our target zones 100% of the time. So for these 4 days, Albany County's environment is pretty good, and it should show us that we have no risk of mold and everything else is doing okay. So Albany, it will be nice to see how things continue to work for you over time. Let's take a look at the Wildlife Conservation Society. Again, we only have a little bit of data, but they're doing good in most categories here, except for metal corrosion, which probably means that that our RH is a little bit on the high side, or that the moisture content is not. Let's take a look at their graph, see what's going on. Okay, so we have the temperature. So here we have these little sort of peaks happening occasionally. There's not enough data really in here to make sense of this pattern. But over time, as you get more data in there, it would be interesting to sort of see if these peaks happen at a sort of regular rate when somebody's going into this location, or if the door is being left open, or the lighting is on, or something that's making a difference to the temperature here. The RH here is mostly within the expected band, although trending a little low. And I think if we compared this to the external temperature, I think we'd see that it's related highly to that. Let's take a look. Bronx doesn't have its own airport, but we can go in and compare that to some data from Manhattan, let's say to go to Central Park. So here again, we have a lot of external data, and we only have a little bit of this data. So here we can see that these sort of peaks and valleys are generally following our external data. So I don't know if the Wildlife Conservation Society has a full HVAC system, but clearly it's at the mercy of our external climate to a good degree. Let's take a look next at what's going on in Buffalo. Let's get rid of our Manhattan environment. So for Buffalo, we have a fairly stable temperature with some sort of cycling going on, which is very common. And we have an RH that is beginning to sort of also trend a little bit on the low side. But what's interesting here is that they've said that this logger is in their geology collections. Maybe the fact that the RH is low here is not so problematic for the kinds of collections that they have here. If they had lots of specimens with pyrite or other kinds of iron inclusions, maybe they'd like to keep this quite low, in which case, if that's a concern for them, knowing what the moisture content is and going back to the analysis, paying attention to the metals corrosion risk metrics would be important. So that's you know, if let's say pyrite decay is that's an issue for them, but something to keep a look at, that ultimately they're still within the RH limits almost all of the time, but that they are trending low with sort of excursions a little bit outside of that general goal. Let's take a look now at the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame. Okay, their temperature is pretty stable, but if we take a look at their RH, they are already significantly under where we'd like to see them. So if during the winter this continues to hover, and stay significantly under 30, and hopefully it won't even drop down under 20, you're at a serious risk then of desiccating the kinds of collections that are being stored here. If this is a collection with a lot of organics, that's going to be something that we might want to be concerned about. And while I don't recommend making changes at this point based on so little data, one change that you might want to look at over time would be how to bring up the humidity using humidifiers. Again, I don't recommend making any changes now, and that's one of the circumstances where over time you'd want to work with a circuit rider or a preservation consultant to talk about what would be an appropriate fix for dealing with this kind of winter dryness in your spaces. But ultimately, just at this point, 81% of your time is low. Let's see. Let's take a look at Schuyler Falls, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. We're going to eliminate, if we wanted to compare, I don't know, to be honest, how far away Clinton and Chautauqua counties are, but these two institutions are having very much the same issues and seem to be sort of subject to the same kind of environment. In terms of their RH, let's take a look. Here you can see these two institutions being compared. The town of Schuyler Falls, which is where the Historical Society is located, has these temperature peaks cropping up. And again, it's not necessarily correlated, let's say, with the weekends. So it will be interesting to see over time if we can figure out what's causing these little spikes. I'm not so concerned about them right now, but it's something that would be sort of interesting. And let's take a look at how it doesn't really seem to have an effect on the RH. The RH here seems to be affected much more strongly by the external data. And let's take a look at the external data for these sites. Again, we have 3 years of external data. We don't need all of that. We're just interested in this last little bit. So let's enlarge that. Okay, I think we have a little bit too much going on in this graph here. We've got 2 different sites plus external data and the temperature and RH all in one graph. It's a little bit overwhelming, so let's simplify it. Let's look at Chautauqua and Schuyler Falls, which are the red and blue, and we're going to compare that to the Plattsburgh Airport and data. What you can see here is that it's a lot more humid in our winter environment. When it's cold, again, when temperature drops, RH goes up because this is relative humidity that we're talking about. But let's take a look at the dew point. So what you can see here, again, and let's change our dew point scale to 0 so we can see the full of it. So what you're seeing here is that, in fact, our external dew point and our internal conditions are sort of tracking generally closely. So what you're seeing here is that our building environment is buffering the collections to a certain extent, but it's still tracking pretty closely. So, so I'm imagining that neither one of these institutions has winter humidification going on. Let's take a look at the Messier Homestead. Okay, so that's our dew point. Let's get back to our temperature. So the Messier Homestead Library in, what did we say, Dutchess County, seems to have temperatures that are quite low. So I'm guessing that this building is unheated entirely. Because the temperatures are so low, though, unlike these other, the other 2 sites that we were looking at where there was wintertime heating, which dropped the RH, here, because our temperatures were low, our RH is actually fairly moderate. And so if we look at the statistics for this site, their risk summary for the time being is actually pretty good, and the mean temperature is in the low 50s but the mean RH is also in the mid-50s. So it's in some ways a fairly moderate and good environment. And if we look at the preservation index for this site, you can see that they have really great numbers here because they're, if 45 gives you an okay rating, they're, well above this because it is, it is cold and moderate. What will be interesting to see over time for an environment that maybe has no environmental control is what happens to this time-weighted preservation index. So again, this is a very short bit of data on which to say much, but you can start to get a sense of saying, okay, in the winter, the environment here is maybe not so problematic, but let's see what's going on here come the summer. So let's take a look at Glen Cove Archive. Now, something funky is going on here. As I told you, when you ever see like a perfectly flat line, that's not a sign that they solved all their preservation and climate issues and they're good to go. Something here happened and they were no longer measuring, and you can see that more clearly if we look here. There's just no data on which to base a PI number. So either the PM2 was stopped and restarted here, or they took it out of the space. In which case it would still be monitoring in a different space. So something happened here, and Glen Cove, if you want to contact me, we can be happy to help if there were any issues going on. So I think this is the Harness Racing Museum. If you'd like to contact me, if you have any trouble after today about reassessing how you, or sorry, refiguring out how to put yourself in the hierarchy in the appropriate county, we can do that. There were a couple of other locations which have some sort of issue going on, and I'll be contacting you. But I think the Long Island Maritime Museum, if you're on the call, somehow your data set is named for the external data, and you'll see here, I think there's been something that's been mixed up, but you probably don't want to call your data set West Sayville, and whoever's using the PEM2 with the serial number 09462, please call me. And so again, I don't know if this is the Long Island Maritime Museum or a different institution, but both of you have some minor issues that we can easily sort you out with to make sure that we can take a look at your data. Let's just quickly take a look here and see, these are clearly two different institutions because we've got different data sets going on here. But you might both be in Suffolk County, which would explain why some of your RH trends are very similar, despite the fact that you've got something different going on here with your temperature. So let's take a look at, we have really only 15 or 20 minutes. So I'm thinking that rather than going back to the PowerPoint, when you get the notes, there are a few sort of hypothetical situations here that that are sort of case studies that you can walk yourself through to figure out what you would want to do, and the information, the sort of keys to these are in the notes field that you'll see in the PDF that you get. At this point, the one other thing that, there's two other things that I'd sort of like to go over with you. One is this Explore Materials. Again, this is sort of an advanced feature of the eClimate Notebook software. Let me jump out of this and get us back into here. If you go into Information, the Information tab, you can see that there's ways that you can add information on your particular logger and what kind of materials you have. You can upload a floor plan if you want to. For most of you, this is not going to be something that you have to spend time on. If you're interested in it, please let me know, and I can help you out with this. But one of the things that's interesting, and this has some information here in the storage planning, but I want to point you here to the Explore Materials phase. If you're an institution that has a focus on a particular kind of material, and what you want to figure out is really what's going to be the best environment for that material, whether, let's say, it's rare books, vellum, bound books, or it's archaeological metals, you can, in the storage planning and Explore Materials phase section, choose a material. Let's say here, let's go into parchment and vellum. What this is doing here is pulling from the data set that was last up. And it's saying that, in fact, that last environment that we were looking at before we jumped over to this section, and it's run for the for conditions that are appropriate for parchment or vellum, and it's saying that that storage space is actually good, and mostly good. We're not worried about the metal corrosion rate so much because we're talking about parchment and vellum. So this is a neat feature if your institution is particularly heavy in a particular material. So many of your institutions, you have a broad range of collections, and so you can play around to sort of see, well, okay, that environment was good for parchment and vellum. It's less good for iron. Let's see, but it's not so bad either for nitrate films. And you can sort of choose different environments and play around by looking at the materials. What's also nice is this will tell you a little bit about what IPI considers a good environment for that material. If you have multiple spaces, it can compare one space to another. Okay, so this is, again, an advanced thing or something that if you have a particular need, you can go into the storage planning. Okay, so the final thing that I want to go over for you that I think will be important to all of you, certainly most of you, is the reports feature. So if you click on this tab here where it says Reports, you'll see that, that there's a few different kinds of reports that you can create. I'm not going to touch on the custom right now, but you're welcome to play with that. And I'm not going to touch so much on the location comparison because most of you only have one logger at the time, for the time being. Let's discuss now the overview report. And what you can see here is an example where it's going to print out sort of a lot of the stuff that you would see on the screen. It's going to print out your risk and metrics using the OK, good, and risk numbers. It gives you the numbers, and it gives you in sort of plain text what are some of the suggestions or things that you need to think about. It is going to give you a temperature and RH graph and print out your statistics. And it, we'll label it with the name and location of your logger for however long it is that you've set it out in the date range. So if you want a shorter date range or the entire trend that you have, you set that up here first in your graph, and then you jump over to Reports, and you just click Create Report. and it's going to pull it up, and you can save it as a PDF. You can email it to yourself. Over time, the Image Permanence Institute, and I personally have also found that facility managers really like this performance report. They want to see graphs. They're not so interested in sort of the good, okay, risk so much. They want to know, based on the metrics that you've set up, the expectations for your spaces and collections, how often is their system, is our HVAC system meeting those target points. So they get the data here with the bands in graphical form. They get the statistics, and then this bar chart down at the bottom shows what percentage of time, using the standard deviations from the statistics, what percentage of time your system is performing within the expected band. So if you look here, you can see this is the relative humidity for this hypothetical example. Graphically, you can see that they're above this band the whole time, and in this corresponding bar chart, you can see that almost, sort of 95% of the time, they are above where they need to be on their RH targets. Only for this, small point in time have they dropped down. Whereas, and so the problem here is clearly something going on with their humidity control, because temperature-wise, they're not doing quite as badly. Their temperature is high a good bit of the time. But I'm sorry, their temperature is low a good bit of the time, but they're still within this range. So, so if you have in fact a large enough staff to have an environmental preservation group like we've talked about in previous sessions, you can talk about what is the data that they want to see. Do they want the raw data? Do they like looking at the graphs? Do they like the bar charts? Do they want the statistics? And if neither one of these overview, which is sort of more geared towards a collection manager level, the performance is geared slightly towards the facilities type, you can always set up your own custom report and pulling from any of these sort of different features and the different metrics. So I know that these webinars, it's hard to focus for a long time. I threw a lot of material at you, but what I want to really emphasize again is get yourself logging, get the PEM2 in your space and measuring. Contact me if you have trouble logging onto the site, and once we have you set up, it's going to be really easy to continue to upload your data. Please try and upload your data on a monthly basis. We may try and pester you, and not to pester you, but actually just to check in with you and see how you're doing over time if we don't see your data coming in. One of the conditions of having a GHHN logger from this grant is that you upload your data to the site so that we can see how you're doing and so that we can help you. We hope that that you'll use the data, that once you have more in, that you'll keep an eye on it, that ultimately you'll print reports and email them and share them with other members of your staff. And again, I want to emphasize, as we've talked about, that I don't expect all of you to be at 70 degrees and 50% with that flat line like I showed you in one of the graphs. What we're hoping is that over time, over the year that we're monitoring, we'll be able to look at your data and figure out ways that we can sort of smooth out those broader seasonal trends that IPI has identified as being more problematic for a lot of the kinds of decay and deterioration that we see with collections over time. So our goal here is to make incremental improvements in ways that aren't going to break your budget. Some of those are things that can be done easily by managing your heating, not overheating in the winter. That's going to be a big thing for many of you in historic homes, which you need to heat to a certain extent, possibly for human comfort, but you don't want to be overheating, which is going to drive your RH conditions down low. So again, let's not be so overly concerned with numbers now. Start collecting your data. let us help you, and we'll keep track of this over time so that we can sort of show IMLS that measuring over time will hopefully lead to results. Let's go back just to, I want to sort of give another shout out, even though Priscilla has done this, to all of the people who have made this program happen. It's been a privilege to be part of this Connecting to Collections statewide implementation grant for New York State that was funded by IMLS. I really believe that New York State museums and libraries and archives have the benefit and support of Greater Hudson Heritage Network and the hard work and expertise of Priscilla and Carrie, and that's a big boon for all of us. We should be grateful to the tools developed by the Image Permanence Institute, which with the support of the National Endowment for the Humanities has been advancing the preservation of collecting holding institutions for decades now. And I hope that you will avail yourself of the terrific future webinars that are being set up by GHHN, as well as the Knowledge Portal, and please use those visits from the circuit riders who can discuss your specific needs. And don't forget that I'm, despite being physically far away, I'm an email and phone call away, and I will be happy to correspond and support you as you work with your PEM2 and the eClimate Notebook software. So I hope you'll feel free to contact me. And with however much time we have left, Carrie, I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, Rachel, it seems that we don't have any questions right at this time. I think everyone's head is spinning with lots of data. I think you have, but I'm sure that thanks to your generosity in offering your help and assistance going forward, that people will be able to contact you when they have any issues. So thank you for making yourself available, and thank you for this fantastic information, this webinar. It's amazing what this technology can do for all of our collections. Now it'll just be interesting to see how it all plays out for over the next year and see what the environmental conditions are, and then we'll be able to go forward. Also, I do want to remind you to definitely call for one of the circuit riders, especially if you're having any issues about where to put the PEM2s or any just taking a look at your environmental conditions as they stand right now. We're happy to have someone come out and take a look at your site. And also you can have someone come out more than just once, as long as it's on a different subject matter, per se. Carrie, you said you had a question for us? Or comment? No? That's right. Carrie wanted me to remind you all that the recording will be going out at the end of the week. So keep an eye on your mail. It will include the recording of the webinar. It will be the PowerPoint presentation, the transcript, and the survey. We request if you could do all of those, look through it all. And again, if you're one of the state or federal sites that was receiving, or actually I should say not receiving the emails and could not open them, please let us know so we can get your personal email address so you can gain this information. So this concludes. Oh, there is a link you'll see at the very bottom of the page which takes you to our website for some more information on it. So we'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today, for all of your patience, and now you're just excited to go out there and upload all that data and keep monitoring your environment. Keep contacting us. We'll be Big Brother on the wall watching you to make sure that you're uploading it periodically throughout the year. And do let us know how things are going. So thanks again to Rachel for all of her expertise, and for Carrie for making sure everything ran smoothly today, and to IMLS and all of our sponsors that you see, and hosts and partners listed on the sides of this slide. This concludes the webinar. We'll look forward to seeing you at our January webinar. So take care, everyone. Have a wonderful holiday season and stay safe on the snowy roads out there. Bye-bye now.